Right, let me start with a question. If you were running a company, would you rather own one business that you understand deeply, or would you rather run 10 completely different businesses spread across various industries? Because for a long time, corporate strategy said the more the better. But right now, some of the world's biggest companies are quietly doing the exact opposite. Take Unilever, for example. Over the last few years, it's been actively selling off parts of its portfolio, cutting smaller brands, and kind of focusing on its strongest product lines, including a $44.8 billion spin-off of its food business. It's a clear sign that even major multi-brand companies are rethinking how much they should actually own. Today, the answer is increasingly do less businesses, but do them better. Welcome back to the Strategy Show, the podcast that connects real-world business events with the strategy concepts that actually help us understand them. I'm Ben Dixon-Green, and in this episode, we're going to explore that shift in the business world around us, from sprawling conglomerates to very focused firms. What's driving it? And is it a good thing? Please follow the show and feel free to drop me a comment or question on the episode. So, when we say conglomerate, what do we actually mean? At its simplest, it's a company that owns businesses in completely unrelated industries. So not just different products, genuinely different worlds. Think about General Electric at its peak, GE. They used to make jet engines, they ran power plants, they controlled NBC Media in America, and they had financial services. Or Tata Group, that manages steel operations and cars and IT services and hotels. Or even Samsung, they deal with electronics and shipbuilding and insurance and construction. These aren't diversified in a mild sense, they're strategically disconnected. The electronics industry for Samsung has little or no crossover with the insurance industry in how it's run, how it's impacted by global events, its supply chains, its staffing, its regulatory environment. And actually, that's the point. Let's rewind back to the 1960s for a minute. Conglomerates didn't just appear, they boomed in the 1960s. In the US alone, thousands of mergers created these kind of multi-industry giants in that decade. So what was going on? Well, let's break it down in plain English. First up, money was cheap. Companies could borrow easily, so they could afford to just go on big acquisition sprees. Secondly, there was huge faith in management. The belief was very much that if you're a good manager, you can run anything. It didn't matter if it was a TV network or a chemicals plant, management skill was seen as being transferable. Finally, diversification looked like almost free risk reduction, because if one part of your business suffers, another offsets it. It's almost like portfolio theory, but applied to companies. And actually, for a while, it worked. So I don't want you to dismiss this too quickly. There are real advantages of conglomerates. Imagine you're running a conglomerate. One of your divisions is generating loads of cash. Another has huge growth potential but needs investment. So instead of going to the capital markets, you just move the money around internally. That's called an internal capital market, and it's really powerful. Because in theory, it means faster decisions at lower financing costs for the parts of the business that need that extra cash, and a better allocation than you would get through external investors. Then there's also risk smoothing. So different industries move differently. So, when oil crashes, tech might boom. When consumer spending drops, infrastructure might hold steady. So if you operate in lots of different industries, your overall earnings become more stable. And finally, there's strategic optionality. If you're a conglomerate, you're not tied to one industry. You can pivot from that. You can acquire and move into a different industry. You can exit an industry that you maybe don't like anymore. It's almost like having multiple bets running at once. So it sounds great. The question is then, what went wrong? Well, here's the turning point. By the 1980s and 1990s, investors started asking a very uncomfortable question, which is, why is this company worth less than its individual pieces? This is where we get the term conglomerate discount from. Studies have repeatedly shown that a diversified firm can trade at around 10 to 15% below the combined value of the individual businesses that make it up. Now, that's a big deal because it means that if you broke the company up, it might be worth more. Now, why does this discount exist? Let's walk through it. First of all, complexity kills performance. Running one business well is hard. Running 5 unrelated ones, it's chaos. Senior leadership ends up too far removed from operations. They make poor or badly thought through strategic decisions because they don't understand all the industry they manage, or they just don't have the time to understand all the issues that each business faces. Secondly, capital allocation becomes political. So instead of using that money internally to invest in the best opportunities, you get strong divisions subsidizing weak ones, which often leads to bad feeling and disagreements. That then leads to internal lobbying for resources. So, the managers of the more successful businesses want more power and to get more investment for their part of the organization, which leads to this idea of empire building. They each try and focus on their own needs for their own part of the business instead of looking at value creation for the shareholders as a whole. The other big problem with conglomerates is that there's a lack of transparency. Investors often struggle to understand what's actually going on. So, if profits fall, which division is responsible for that? If margins rise, is that sustainable? Well, it depends where the margins rose within this really complex organization. It's unclear. And markets hate uncertainty. Now, let's make this real with an example. We're going to go back to GE or General Electric. It's probably the most famous conglomerate story. Now, at its peak, General Electric's market value exceeded $400 billion. So around the year 2000, it was the most valuable company in the world. It looked unstoppable. But beneath the surface, its finance arm, GE Capital, had become huge and really risky. The business mix was incredibly complex, and capital allocation became harder and harder. Managers couldn't decide where was best to put the money. Fast forward to 2018, GE was removed from the Dow Jones and its value had collapsed by about 90% from its peak. So what did it do next? Well, it broke itself up. GE is splitting into 3 separate companies: aviation, healthcare, and energy. It's a complete reversal of the conglomerate model. And actually, GE isn't an exception. This is happening everywhere. Let me give you a few examples. Siemens has been steadily simplifying. It's spun off its healthcare business. It's separated its energy division. Johnson & Johnson recently split their consumer health business, which is now Kenvue, and their pharma and medical devices division. And as we mentioned at the start of the show, Unilever has sold dozens of smaller brands. It's streamlined its portfolio, and it's trying to focus heavily on what it sees as its power brands. Now, that's not random. It's a structural shift in strategy within the market. So I guess, why now? Why are companies suddenly deciding, let's do less? There are 3 big reasons, really. First of all, investors are getting more aggressive. Activist investors are pushing for breakups. Their argument is simple: unlock value. They're believers in that conglomerate discount we talked about before. So if they can break up these companies, the shares they own will be worth more split apart into different businesses. Linked to this, markets are increasingly rewarding focus. The reason is that focused companies that don't operate in lots of different markets tend to have clearer strategies, they tend to have better margins, and they're easier to value. All of that's attractive to shareholders. Finally, what I would say is complexity is more dangerous today than it used to be. The world has become, as you may have noticed, an increasingly volatile place. There's trade wars, increased regulation, political uncertainty, pandemics. In those sort of situations, complexity becomes a liability rather than a strength because there are more issues to deal with than ever before. So managing 10 different companies becomes increasingly impossible to do well. But wait, some conglomerates still work. There are exceptions. I mean, for example, Berkshire Hathaway is a classic. It works because it allocates capital rather than centrally managing operations. So in other words, it keeps its subsidiaries independent. Alphabet, the parent company of Google, works because its businesses all share a common technological logic. They all work together. So the lesson that we're looking to take from this isn't that conglomerates are bad. It's that they only truly work under specific conditions. So what's the deeper strategy lesson here? I guess in the past, scale and diversification was strength. Today, focus and clarity is what gives you advantage. And maybe the most important insight, strategy is as much about what you don't do as what you do. So our final thought, if conglomerates were such a good idea, why are so many companies undoing them? And are we witnessing the end of conglomerates, or are we just looking at a more disciplined version of them? Thanks for listening to The Strategy Show. If you've enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow so you don't miss the next one. And if you've got thoughts or questions, drop them in the comments. See you next time.